week to chip through today, starting with a local Aussie headline about an attempt on comedian Jordan Shanks' life last night. There's also some news regarding little Quinton Simon and some YouTube shenanigans. Then we'll have a quick look at the Debbie Collier case, plus we have some updates for the Depp v Heard case, and some quick updates in the Marilyn Manson and Danny Masterson / Scientology cases, and then we'll do a short recap on some world news.
In case you haven't heard, and the press did everything that they possibly could to make sure that you know exactly where I live.
Here on Wilga Street, because of who lives here out the back, YouTuber and political comedian Jordan Shanks.
Thank you very much, you vultures. My house was burned down to some degree. I don't know, I haven't seen it yet because I just came back from a tour. So we're going to go now and look at the damage. But yeah, it looks like it was some heavy hitters. There's obviously a few suspects that I might be divulging in a press conference soon. And let's see how much those sacks of sorry vermin let go to the news. Because so far their story has been, with so many enemies and so many people hating him, it's a wonder that this hasn't happened sooner. Oh, okay, so you wish death on me. Thanks so much, fucking Seven.
Police admit given Shanks' controversial videos posted online, there may be a long list of people who have issues with him.
Obviously, we've done some extremely dangerous reporting over the last year, I suppose, of a bunch of extremely powerful people and corporations. There is many people that would want to do that. I obviously can't say who I suspect it is, but I do have like a short list in my head of who I think would have done it. I would hope that the New South Wales strike force that is supposedly set up for fixated people and terrorists would be looking into this instead of a comedian and his team for 6 months straight at the whim of a previous premier that all of you defended for his last 10 years, and then when he came out, and even after all the New York stuff, you're still sitting there defending him now. I saw all of your articles today where you all wrote all of the same little narrative that you write every time. I would hope that you would put just as much attention on the fact that that happened as you have on trying to assassinate my character over the last year. Thanks for your time.
Did something happen here a week ago, Jordan?
Someone has clearly just tried to kill Jordan Shanks. He's extremely upset. It's not something he can make a gag about, you know. And as he said, the list of suspects is considerable. It makes one ponder. But also, to give him due, give him some credit for the work he's done, for this extraordinary array of stories that he's brought against the most powerful people in New South Wales and some of its most powerful corporations. And also, he's also facing jail on a private criminal prosecution by Clubs New South Wales. This is out of control. This man is one of the best journalists in the state, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, he's got character faults that people like to point on, but no one has the record that he has for doing some hard-hitting journalism. And this is his payday. Someone's trying to kill him, and another corporation's trying to put him in jail. It's got to end, but all power to Jordan Shanks.
What happened here last week? This is the second time he's been
It's the second time. It's the second time.
What happened last week?
There was an attempted...
Excuse me 1 second, folks. I have to speak, gentlemen.
Well,
Clearly, this is what happens when you expose legitimate corruption in the government. And people wonder why I don't trust mainstream media or governments.
But Julie Jennings did speak with a friend of the family who's known as Cher, doesn't really want her identity out there. For whatever reason, the heat is up on this case. People are getting threatened left and right.
Pretty sure we all know why. She's not a friend of the family, she's an imposter. Just because you crash someone's social media messages doesn't make you a friend.
For me, of course, my radar is up with Danny. And because, you know, from what we were told, Danny canceled the babysitter. And I have to wonder why. I like, is it because at 5:29 a.m. there was not 3 children to bring to the babysitter? I don't know. But I think it's fair to question. And, you know, that back door was open till 5:44 a.m., I believe, if the timeline, is that right? Danny sent that text message at 5:29. Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to look further into Danny.
When you say the back door, is that something from surveillance footage? Is that from an alarm system, or is that just from?
I think it's from their alarm system. I would have to look back because it's on one of my live shows. But when Danny, the door was open. I can't remember how long, but until 5:44, the back door, and Danny sent the alarm or that text message to the babysitter at 5:29.
For those who are unfamiliar with why I'm using the term gonzo here, it's a journalistic term which means inserting yourself into the story, which is exactly what Cher has done here. And frankly, I'm surprised that Court TV were taken in by the clickbait. In case you're not aware, Cher is Benny Key's sidekick in the Summer Wells case, both of whom inserted themselves into the story of a missing little girl and turned it into a YouTube circus.
A 22-year-old is now in jail charged with murdering her 20-month-old son, Quentin. After weeks of searching, Chatham County Police believe they have found the little boy's remains at the landfill. Leilani Simon reported Quentin missing on October 5th. After a few days of investigating, detectives believed the little boy was dead and that his mother was the prime suspect. Authorities searched through more than 1 million pounds, 1.2 million pounds of trash over 30 days to look for the boy's remains. They believe the FBI will confirm the remains belong to Quentin.
We have a very strong case. We have put thousands of hours into this, and we believed that this was the right move today to be able to do that. She doesn't deserve a Thanksgiving, quite frankly, if I can go off script a little bit. Quentin deserves that.
Well, Simon is at the Chatham County Jail awaiting a bond hearing.
More breaking news at this hour, just coming into the newsroom. The autopsy has now been released in the death of Athens mother Debbie Collier. In a huge turn of events tonight, the medical examiner with the GBI has now ruled her death as a suicide. According to the autopsy, the 59-year-old's death was a result of inhalation of superheated gases, thermal injuries, and hydrocodone intoxication. Detectives have been investigating the circumstances surrounding Collier's death since September after her body was found burned 50 miles from her home in Athens. Now, they previously said they were investigating her death as a homicide. However, today's report is calling her death self-inflicted.
Totally not surprised. One thing I noticed commentators were not taking into account was the obvious fact that somebody who's considering self-deletion is not thinking rationally. And when one is not thinking rationally, one tends to do irrational things. I had thought, originally, she may have been sending some kind of coded message to her daughter, but then a second thought occurred to me, and that is her age group. Women who fall into this age group tend to be experiencing something that I like to call men on pause. During this time, the chemical imbalances in the body can cause great emotional distress, irrational thoughts and behaviours, and sometimes deep depression and or manic behaviour. So this might be something to take into account in future cases involving women in this age group. While Mr. Depp appears to be putting these tumultuous court cases behind him and moving on with his life, it appears Amber Heard is having a very difficult time moving on. Among her numerous interviews after the court case, where she continued to defame Mr. Depp without fear or remorse. Her girlfriend, Eve Barlow, has waged a social war on Twitter from which she and Heard claim they are receiving unwarranted backlash.
So the group that authored the letter was primarily composed of anonymous women who have been quietly supporting Amber Heard on social media for months. These are average women, many of whom identify as domestic violence survivors or sexual assault survivors, who have been working over the past month or so to reach out to these feminist organizations and rally support around this letter for Amber Heard. So some of the people who have signed this letter were among some of those few voices who were speaking out on social media. And at the time, there was such an overwhelming support for Johnny Depp that a lot of the people speaking out in support of Amber Heard or to counter that narrative were met with online harassment, silencing, and intense criticism that lasted for months. And I think, seeing how some of these women have banded together to rally these organizations around this open letter, it shows that a lot of these feminist groups were on her side, but some of them maybe didn't feel empowered to come out and support her at that time due to the overwhelming amount of backlash that people in support of Amber Heard were facing. So their strength in numbers, I think that points to the reason that a lot of groups felt they were able to sign this letter at this stage. And it also points to some of the long-lasting effects of the trial and how it was received by the general public. The letter notes that there is this uptick in defamation lawsuits being used against people who accuse men or individuals of sexual assault, of domestic violence. We've seen this play out in more celebrity relationships. There are other celebrity men who have launched these types of lawsuits against their former accusers. We're also seeing it play out with all different types of victims advocacy at every level.
I'm sorry, Kat. What's the appropriate recourse for people who have been falsely accused? You can't just ring the cops and say, charge this person because they've falsely accused me. Defamation, Kat, is the appropriate legal recourse. So let's have a closer look at the backlash that Kat Tenbudge and her mate Eve Barlow have been getting online, which they claim is a product of outright misogyny.
We can't let the desensitivity seep in. But if it's your problem, then it's not mine.
Before the launch of her virtual Savage X Fenty lingerie runway show, Rihanna is facing criticism for Johnny Depp's involvement. According to the Los Angeles Times, Depp will make history as the first man to appear in a spotlight moment in the 4th episode of the show, which will air on Amazon Prime on November 9th. When it was announced that Depp had been cast in the show, there was an immediate outcry online. As users voiced their displeasure with his inclusion, Depp's name started trending on Twitter, along with Savage X Fenty. One person tweeted that Rihanna's decision to include Johnny Depp in her show was ridiculously so weird. Prior to the trial, nobody was talking about this man, but because he beats women, that is the only reason he is relevant. Where is her head at? Depp's presence in the program only served to increase shock value, according to another tweet. People voiced their displeasure at Depp's inclusion as a model in the show on Twitter in light of the past abuse allegations leveled against him. Rihanna's own history of domestic abuse was also brought up. Online, people voiced their displeasure with the casting of Depp by using the hashtags AbuserXFenty and DitchDepp and calling for a boycott of the business. Johnny Depp has been hailed as a hero by insane right-wing misogynistic extremists, and now he's being asked to appear in the Savage X Fenty show. Never imagined a woman with such influence would give in to the hashtag MeToo backlash. The producer and activist Drew Dixon, who had accused Russell Simmons of rape, said she was really disappointed in Rihanna. Some claim that because Rihanna supported Depp, it was heartwarming because Depp is also a victim of abuse. You all overlook the fact that Rihanna is also a victim of domestic abuse and can identify with other victims. She's so authentic for this, honestly, a user on Twitter said. The pop star is yet to give out a detailed statement regarding the situation, but given the fact that she invited Depp to the show, we don't think it's going to go over very well with the pro-Amber crowd. In addition to her Fenty Beauty and Fenty Skin lines, Rihanna's Savage X Fenty television show and other business endeavors have all contributed to her personal brand's emphasis on inclusivity. Her Savage X Fenty runway shows in particular have received praise for their diverse castings, which incorporate a wide range of various races, body types, gender identities, and sexual orientations. However, many fans believe that Rihanna had compromised the Savage X Fenty brand's values by casting Depp. In a graphic posted to Twitter, author Ella Dawson asked, "How does a misogynistic, racist, homophobic abuser represent fearlessness, confidence, and inclusivity?" Savage X Fenty claims to celebrate fearlessness, confidence, and inclusivity.
And so it goes back and forth endlessly. As soon as Mr. Depp appears in something, the feminists lose their minds, the Depp supporters respond, and then the feminists use that as ammunition, saying that they're the ones being attacked. If we're being totally truthful though, I would say the thing that they're most upset about is that Mr. Depp didn't get cancelled. If I was a betting person, I would say that this latest shenanigan with the open letter was an attempt by Amber Heard's team to unduly influence the appeals process. And, well, that's not justice, is it? As for the appeal, Amber is dragging her feet, which I'm not surprised because I don't think she has any way to pay her appeal lawyers. But Johnny has his in, and this is Emily D. Baker's rundown of his appeal brief.
I think there are some really, really good arguments here. Not arguments that I'm going, ugh, good luck with that, but actual, real, meaty questions of law. Like, how do you hold someone responsible for what their independent contractor said when it seems contrary to the law of the land? That's a real fair question. How did they make this balance of what the jury can hear and what they can't hear to give context? Because if the context needed is that both attorneys are making statements in this article, then is the reader really taking that as fact, or is the reader taking that as two different sides of the same piece of evidence? And does that matter whether it's defamatory? Yes. So I think it's a strong brief. I think they make good arguments. I'll be really interested to see what the reply brief said. And
what Amber has submitted so far cannot be called brief, but this is Andrea Burkhart's rundown on what Amber has submitted.
Yes, I have looked in detail at a lot of these legal issues. I've done a lot of the research. So my personal opinion is that it's going to be very unlikely for any of those things to happen. But it's not impossible for the type of black swan event where, you know, the courts have just been waiting to resolve a conflict in the law that just happens to be line up with the position that Amber Heard wants the court to take. These things do happen. So I can't rule out the possibility that she would possibly win her appeal. She does have issues that she can present, but she's got to employ an intelligent strategy in how she selects those issues, meaning she needs to listen to her gut lawyer and not, follow her own impulses in what she would like this appeal process to be. But they still have the hurdle to get over of just because you've got a legal argument doesn't mean you have a winning one. They got to show that Judge Azcarate got the law wrong, and it doesn't take a lot of work. Well, it does, but it's not that difficult to go back and read Judge Azcarate's rulings, look at the basis for them, and see that they are pretty thoroughly researched, clearly reasoned, and going to be difficult to challenge. So for that reason, I don't expect she will win her appeal.
And that's where the appeals are at this current stage. Amber Heard is being sued by her insurance companies, which is who was paying for her lawsuit. They now say that she deliberately lied and defamed Depp, and so they're not liable to pay. And she has just this week turned around and sued them back. And of course, she's pulling all sorts of shenanigans in that court case as well. I will close out this video with a unique perspective about the online shenanigans from Nate the lawyer. But first, we have a couple more items to cover. So moving on to Marilyn Manson. Esme Bianco, whom you might know as the actress who flashed a gash on Game of Thrones, has had her motion to sanction Manson for filing one of his motions a little late flatly rejected by the court. Otherwise, Bianca's case has come to a standstill due to Ashley Morgan Smithline's shenanigans. Meanwhile, Manson's defamation case against Evan Rachel Wood and Ilma Gore is moving forward, although it's unclear how much we're going to be able to see and report on, since Gore and Wood both filed motions for protection right before depositions have begun. It's fast looking like this case is not going to be televised, and that depositions are probably going to be kept under seal, so we may not have any news to report on this until perhaps after a jury has made a decision. Danny Masterson was charged for doing horrible things to 3 women from 2001 to 2003, and he faces up to 45 years in prison if he's convicted on all counts. He maintains that it was all consensual.
Friday afternoon, and by now you've probably seen the news. About 1:39 in the afternoon today, we heard a double buzz from the jury. Deputy Contreras wouldn't say anything. Clerk wouldn't say anything. But then we saw the judge in her robe. The attorney started coming in. We knew something was up. At 2 o'clock, Judge Olmedo informed us that the jury is deadlocked on all 3 counts. I don't know if there was anybody in the room that was expecting that. She said, and of course, at this point, they're not going to tell us what that split is. 6-6, 11-1 for conviction, 11-1 for acquittal. We just have no idea. It's a Friday before Thanksgiving week, and the judge earlier in the day had informed us that because the jurors have trips planned next week, even if they weren't done deliberating today, they weren't going to come back until the following Monday. So what she decided to do, since the jury said they were deadlocked, was to let them go early today, let them have their week off for Thanksgiving, and we'll be back at it Monday morning. I talked to a fellow journalist who ran into Cohen outside the defense attorney, Philip Cohen, outside the courtroom, who said he's looked pretty thrilled. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of, I don't know, you know, Cohen raised an objection. He didn't like the fact that they were going to be out so long. Of course, he wants a mistrial. He wants, you know, but he didn't move for a mistrial, but he's hoping the judge would declare one because of the jury being deadlocked. But, you know, Judge Olmedo says, I mean, it's been 2.5 days, if that. It's just not long enough to give up on this jury. It's a complex case. Cohen tried to argue it's actually a simple case. It's the same charge 3 times. At this point, it's just a matter of, do you believe the women, do you not believe the women? Of course, that's his characterization. We don't know what the jury's hung up on. So Judge Olmedo said, no, she's going to send them home. They'll have the week off. The other part of Cohen's objection was that they'll have all this time to, see publicity about the case, read articles about the case. But the judge said, I've given them instructions not to do that. She puts her trust in them. So, this is very disappointing. I'm going to have to fly home and come back in a week. I don't know. I mean, it depends on what the split is. We don't know what the split is. We just have to hope that this jury can somehow, after the break, find a way to come together and make a unanimous decision one way or the other. You're wondering what happens if they can't. If after some additional time goes by and they still say they can't come to a unanimous decision, she will then declare a hung jury and a mistrial, and then the prosecutor will have to decide whether or not to file the charges again and have another trial sometime later. And then, various things will have to come into that decision. At that point, if that's the case, when we come back and there's a hung jury and the judge declares a mistrial, then it will be revealed what the split is. And if the split is mostly for acquittal, that'll enter into the prosecutor's decision on whether or not to refile.
So, how close did we come to World War III this week?
There was a missile explosion, okay? And it landed... the missile struck a grain dryer outside the Polish village of... I'm afraid I'm going to butcher this, Claudia. I'm sorry. Przewodów? I'm really sorry I butchered that. So that's 6.4 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. That's the most important part. Okay, so right near the Ukrainian border. There are 2 men killed, 58 and 60 years old. And this is just 70 kilometers. This town is just 70 kilometers from the nearest, largest Ukrainian city, Lviv. And what happened is Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, he immediately comes out and says, oh, it's the Russians who did this. Because the rocket is an S-300, right? The S-300 is a surface-to-air missile, which was built by the Soviets in the Cold War. They have a newer generation now, the S-400. But the S-300 and S-200, you'll find many countries around the world still using them. They're very capable. And S-300s typically fire missiles that are classified as long range. And we're talking about 95 miles, so that's 150 kilometers, right? And the question that everyone is asking, including myself, is how the hell did the Russians fire a missile that has a range of 150 kilometers all the way in Poland? The radius, if you just look at the radius, it doesn't make any sense. There are no Russian S-300 installations or batteries in this radius. There just aren't. We know the Ukrainians have them. The Ukrainians have a lot of Soviet equipment because they were part of the Soviet Union. They still have, you name it, from tanks to, machine guns to planes, you name it, they still have them. That's common. So it stands to reason that the Ukrainians probably did this because, it happens. Things misfire. They misfire. And instead of just taking responsibility for it, he goes on this weird, Zelensky goes on this weird crusade and he keeps insisting it's the Russians.
Just after 6 a.m. on Wednesday, as the TV breakfast shows were going to air, and 24 hours before the Daily Telly raised the ghost of 1939, weapons experts on Twitter were saying the Polish missile was from an S-300 air defense system used by the Ukrainians to shoot down incoming missiles from Russia. And with the breakfast shows in full swing, still, the highly respected Ukraine weapons tracker was offering this definitive take to its 70,000 followers.
So, what crashed in the village of Szawadu, Poland today? With the cooperation of Blue Boy 1969, we analysed the available photos of fragments and came to a clear conclusion that they belong to the 48 D6 motor of the 5V55 series missile of the S-300AD system, a Ukrainian one.
So, how long did it take for the media to raise doubts or correct the record? Far too long. And considering how much rubbish the media can find on Twitter, it's pathetic they all missed that. But around 2 p.m, US President Joe Biden did cast doubt on the Russian story by warning journalists of the G20 in Bali.
It's unlikely in the minds of the trajectory that it was fired from Russia, but we'll see.
And a couple of hours after that, on Wednesday afternoon, Nine realised that the media had jumped the gun.
In the last few minutes, we've learnt that 3 high-ranking US officials have briefed Associated Press. They are now saying it was, in fact, a Ukrainian missile that was fired at a Russian missile, and it's the Ukrainian missile that you're looking at in these pictures. It's the Ukrainian missile that has fallen into Polish territory. Completely changes the complexion of the story.
Shortly after that, 10 and 7 News also accepted they had got it wrong. But on the ABC's The Drum at 6 p.m, the Australian's foreign editor Greg Sheridan was dismissing Biden's warning and still pointing the finger at Putin.
It's hard to imagine that anyone else fired the missile except the Russians. Joe Biden said it didn't seem to come from Russia, so presumably it was fired from Donbass or Crimea or perhaps from the sea. Russia fired 100 missiles on Ukraine in a day. No one else was firing missiles on Ukraine.
And next morning, despite the head of NATO and the Polish president announcing the missile was fired by Ukraine, the telly's editorial was raising the ghost of 1939, and the Australian was leading its front page with this outdated headline.
NATO locked in crisis talks over missile strike on Poland.
With the story calling it a Russian-made missile, and an editorial inside the paper warning,
missile hit risks European war.
The deadly strike on Poland could trigger a response by NATO.
When stories are developing fast, it's always a challenge for newspapers to keep up. But the Australian had more than enough time to get it right. It failed, and it failed big time. But perhaps the sudden departure of the paper's editor-in-chief, Chris Dorr, after he reportedly made lewd comments to a woman at a US News Corp gathering, an allegation he declined to comment on, could explain some of the confusion.
I get it. The media makes big bucks off war, and so do the weapons manufacturers. But what do you and I get from it? What do the people on the ground in Ukraine get from it? And if nuclear Armageddon happens, what does the whole world gain from it? This giant debacle is going to go down in history as the next best thing to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Totally disgusted with the media today.
The Me Too movement is in crisis. The mainstream media pushed the narrative that all women who make accusations must be believed. Now, to support this believe all women narrative, they pointed to Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein. See, women have made many allegations against these men and other men for years, but were not believed. These women also provided evidence, and the mainstream media protected these men by not publishing their stories. There's actually a movie that's out now about this struggle. It's called She Said. So to correct this injustice, we went from one extreme, believe no women, to another extreme, believe all women. Now, Amber Heard used this believe all women narrative to her advantage. Now, she's a woman, and she claimed that her husband, actor Johnny Depp, had abused her. So, based on the new rules, we must believe her and believe all women. And we did. We believed Amber Heard, and her husband, Johnny Depp, was canceled. Then her ex-husband did something crazy. He sued his ex-wife in the United States for defamation, claiming that she intentionally lied about being abused. Now, during a 6-week trial, all of Amber Heard's lies were exposed to the world. Here are some of her lies.
$7 million in total was donated to, I split it between the ACLU and Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. I wanted nothing.
Sitting here today, you have not donated, not pledged, the $7 million divorce settlement to charity.
I use pledge and donation synonymous. They
But
do
I
the same
don't.
thing.
Ms. Heard, I don't use it synonymously. You don't have any visible injuries to your face, do you?
None that you can see.
Even though Mr. Depp whacked you in the face so hard that your nose bled?
He did.
While wearing chunky big rings, right?
That's correct.
This is a picture of you and Mr. Depp the night after Mr. Depp allegedly whacked you in the face so hard you thought he had broken your nose.
He did whack me in the face, and I did think it broke my nose.
Your nose doesn't appear to be injured in any of these pictures, does it, Ms. Heard?
That's why I'm wearing makeup.
So now, with Amber Heard clearly lying on the stand and everyone knew it, the public turned. Now, during the trial, a woman lawyer, Camille Vasquez, exposed Amber Heard's lies. Women on the jury found that Amber Heard had intentionally lied about being abused. And a woman judge passed judgment on Amber Heard. And remember, this was after they heard all the evidence and from both sides. But there was one major problem. The mainstream media and liberal activists hated the fact that Amber Heard was exposed. Now, this was because the trial was public and everyone can see the evidence. They couldn't just cover up Amber's lies. And let's not forget, the mainstream media backed Amber. So, to gaslight the public, the mainstream media just claimed that all the backlash was because everyone was misogynistic and that Amber was the true victim. Now, I mentioned the word gaslighting. What is gaslighting? Well, gaslighting is the psychological manipulation where the gaslighter causes the victim to question the validity of undisputed facts and reality. This is to confuse the victim and create a loss of confidence or self-esteem in the claims that they're making. Listen to Kat Tinbard from NBC attempt to gaslight us.
So what these experts are saying is that a lot of misconceptions around domestic violence and these types of abusive relationships were spread during this trial. A lot of people watched the trial but walked away viewing Amber Heard as the aggressor and Johnny Depp as the victim. And what these experts are saying is, you got it wrong. So I think people should take a look at what they're saying.
So they want to convince us that the jury, the judge, and everyone watching Amber lie got it wrong. And this is what you just heard. Kat Tinbard and these feminist groups are essentially just gaslighting the public. They want you to question the undisputed facts that Amber was found to be intentionally lying by other women. And by saying all the experts claim that you got it wrong, this makes you question the validity of the undisputed facts and reality to confuse you and to create a loss of confidence and self-esteem in the facts that we know to be true. Amber Heard is a liar. So these feminist groups wrote this letter claiming experts know what happened and that everyone else who says different is wrong. That includes the jury and anyone who agreed with the jury. And here is how these activist groups are labeling the public.
The open letter continued, much of this harassment was fueled by disinformation, misogyny, biphobia, and a monetized social media environment, where a woman's allegations of domestic violence and sexual assault were mocked for entertainment. The same disinformation and victim-blaming tropes are now being used against others who have alleged abuse.
So if you disagree with the experts, you are misogynistic and biphobic, as you can see, they are just trying to shame you and cause you to lose confidence in the undisputed facts of this case. Gaslighting. Now, every major news organization is covering this story to force you to question the reality of the situation. The experts are saying the jury got it wrong. Why aren't you also saying that? So, has this open letter changed your mind about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial? Now, all the polls taken after the trial show that only 13% disagree with the verdict. And in every group, men, women, Republican, Democrat, a vast majority agree with the jury. Now the media is making a huge push to change your mind. Let's see what happens. Are you going to believe the experts or are you going to believe your lying eyes?